Good evening, gamers. Today we will be covering the M16A3, the dread of the Union Army, and the gun that almost lost the Union the Civil War. Thank you for subscribing. If you haven't subscribed, you need to do that now and like the video and comment. Please leave your mother's maiden name and your social security number. Otherwise, I'll think that you don't love me, and that'll make me cry. Anyway, so to fully understand the M16A3, you have to go back to its roots. So during the Civil War, the Union Army implemented the 1858 Colt. Again, misnomer. I keep saying it. It's such a prevalent colloquial term that it was manufactured or designed by Colt, but it was actually designed by John Moses' New Army. Anyhow, when that was developed and that was adopted by the Union Army, the Confederates kind of like they pooped themselves a little. They got a little poopy, and they knew they needed something to combat it. So they went to this guy named Marcel. No one knows his last name. All we know is that his name's Marcel, and he makes guns. So they went to Marcel and they're like, hey, we need a new gun. So Marcel's like, okay, and took him a little, and he threw some letters and numbers together, and then he took some psychedelics, and he came up with the M16A3, which is what I have in my hands right now. The M16A3, pretty effective firearm overall, fairly well regarded in the firearms community, as it almost won the Confederates the war. However, the New Army was just too good. Just couldn't compete. Cannot compete with the New Army. But obviously, this wasn't the end of the M16A3's story. It was produced in small quantities, though. Had it been produced in larger quantities, maybe we would have seen a different side of history. But it still wouldn't be able to defeat the Union Army. So after the war, a lot of Confederate soldiers tried to hold on to their weapons. However, the Republican Party in the United States at the time kind of prevented that from happening. So a lot of these went into U.S. storage. And some of them, which weren't put into the U.S. storage, were used in the Wild West. You can see a lot of paintings that tribute the M16A3. If you don't see any paintings like that, that means you're being brainwashed and your school is hiding those textbooks from you. And you should contact your district administrator to see if you find some better textbooks with real information referencing the M16A3 as a firearm that was used in the West and in the Civil War. So, yeah, in the Wild West, it was pretty effectively used, although in small numbers. Sometimes colloquially referenced to as the Henry Lever action. And then when it was painted, usually it was painted incorrectly, so it looked different and more so resembled the Henry 45-70. But again, that two completely different firearms. So, following the war, you have anyway, following the war, you have the Wild West, and it was an effective weapon in the Wild West, and it killed a lot of natives. It got a lot of people land that they hold on to this day. Their family holds on to this day. The M16A3 is pretty prolific for that reason. So after the Wild West period, you have not a whole lot going on. Then you get into World War I. Now, I reference World War I a lot in this channel. That's because a lot of these weapons end up being used during that war because a lot of countries were under-equipped. So the US started deploying these in small numbers to replace the Browning automatic rifle. And it was primarily used as a hip-fire, walking fire, suppressing fire type of gun, rather than an in-place machine gun. So when they were crossing the trenches, they would be using the M16A3 to try to suppress the enemy machine guns from mowing them down, just to have something to shoot in front of them. So it was effective in that role. It was also loaned to the French because the Shosha light machine gun was such a piece of garbage that it didn't function half the time, so they were loaned to the French quite a bit. Now, not a whole lot is known about its use in World War II, because it was beginning to get more recognition as that Confederate rifle, and it had a lot of controversy tied to its name. And because of this, it wasn't really talked a lot about during World War II, but you can be sure it was used by American arsenals as well as French arsenals from World War I, because, as you may not know, the French ended up having to pull out Berthier's and Lebel rifles to defend themselves when the Germans attacked, because a lot of their new production rifles, like the MOS-36, were up in the front lines. So they ended up having some M16A3s back in the back lines defending as light machine guns with some Shoshas. But, you know, they still got steamrolled. Kind of shows why the Confederacy lost the war. Anyway, past World War II, it didn't really see not a lot of recorded history on the firearm during the war. But during the Cold War, it began to see some use. Starting in a small proxy conflict in Vietnam, the United States developed the M16, based on the M16A3. However, they noticed that there was a lot of problems going on, especially with the ammunition. The ammunition was a large problem. So they chrome-lined the bolt, made it the M16A1, which was just like a little addition that they copied off of the M16A3. And then, yeah, that's what the United States used during Vietnam War. However, if you look closely, you could probably find a few images of, or a few videos even, of the M16A3 in action. However, again, a little bit frowned upon due to its tie to the Confederacy. The M16A3, not a whole lot of use because the United States had adopted the A1. But during the Vietnam War, we learned an important lesson about fully automatic firearms, which was the soldiers tended to just spray and pray, which meant they would just empty a whole magazine, not really looking where it was going because they didn't want to pop their head up. So the United States was like, we need to conserve ammunition because this is very costly. So they developed the M16A2, which was primarily just a copy of the M16A3 again, but it only had burst or semi-automatic. However, again, the United States found out that having to restrict their soldiers never really worked. We see this example throughout history. Whenever countries try to restrict their soldiers' access to ammunition to try to save money, it never works. You see that with bolt-action rifles. Before World War I had magazine cutoffs where it would make it so that it was single shot, and then the magazine was only supposed to be used in emergencies. But they got rid of that because it was damaging to the soldiers. So the United States, after they had developed the M16A2, decided to just give up and fully adopt the M16A3. However, they adopted it in such a way to present it as a new rifle, as not the one that the Confederacy used, and as one that would be completely patriotic. And this rifle was deployed in conflicts in the Middle East, such as Afghanistan and Iraq, to pretty good extent. It's very flat trajectory, flat firing, which helps out in the long straights of the desert, the mountains of those areas in the Middle East, and it was effective in that role. But some users of the M16A3, many of you might not know this, or many of you probably do know this, but John F. Kennedy served in the Second World War on a naval ship, and that was primarily where the M16A3s went during World War II. Not a lot of accounts of that because it was a little bit frowned upon at the time. But John F. Kennedy he used this rifle, and that kind of inspired the adoption of the M16 and the M16A1 later on, because John F. Kennedy was such a popular president. He figured since he used the rifle, it might be more acceptable for the United States public to see it as a patriotic symbol, rather than a reminder of the past Confederacy. So anyway, M16A3, good rifle. As far as Phantom Forces goes, it's a jack of all trades. It's good, decent hip fire, better sight accuracy, and you can rely upon it. But just remember, if you use it, you have to remember you might be supporting the Confederacy, and you never know it. If you're into that, I don't like you. Anyhow, thanks for watching, and if I get 10 subscribers, I'll do a face reveal, and if I get 400,000 subscribers by the end of the month, I'll end my own life.